A single dad with tired eyes and calloused hands juggles two jobs just to keep the lights on for his little girl. He believes no one sees his struggle until a chance encounter with a stranger in a crisp suit sets off a chain of events that will change everything. What starts with a spilled coffee and a quiet thank you leads to an unthinkable opportunity and a decision that will test his pride, his heart, and the only thing he's ever truly lived for, his daughter. Stick around, because this story is about the kind of kindness that doesn't come with a price tag, and the kind of love that builds empires from nothing. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The alarm clock screamed in the darkness before dawn, sharp and merciless. Nathan reached out with a groan, smacking the snooze button with a weary hand that already ached from yesterday's labor. His fingers were rough, calloused, permanent reminders of the life he was still trying to make work. The apartment was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the walls and into your bones, the kind that tells you the heat might have been shut off again. He sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. His body protested. His back ached from the warehouse shift, and his knees still throbbed from crouching behind the diner counter for hours. But none of that mattered yet. There were only two thoughts in his mind this early: don't wake Grace, and get her lunch ready before the coffee starts burning. The kitchen light flickered once before settling. It cast a pale yellow over the narrow counters and chipped cabinets. The fridge was mostly empty: 2 eggs, half a jar of peanut butter, a slice of bread stiff from air exposure, and a single apple that had seen better days. He sighed, reaching in. A peanut butter sandwich it was, again. He moved quietly, spreading what little he had onto the bread with the kind of careful patience reserved for those who've learned to stretch a meal with pride. Every motion was deliberate. He wrapped the sandwich in foil, tucked in a folded napkin, and scribbled a note on the back. "You're gonna do amazing today. I love you, Dad." Behind him, soft footsteps shuffled in. Grace stood in the hallway, her oversized pajamas swallowing her frame, hair a tangled cloud. "I smelled peanut butter," she said sleepily, rubbing one eye. He smiled and crouched. "Hey, you're supposed to be sleeping." She hugged him instead, tight, small arms around his neck, warm and familiar. "I had a dream you got a big house with a yard," she mumbled against his shoulder. "And we had pancakes every day." Nathan's throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head. "Sounds like a good dream, kiddo." But as she turned to shuffle back to her room, he stood there alone for a moment longer, holding her lunchbox like it was fragile, like it was a promise he hadn't figured out how to keep yet. Then he grabbed his coat, took one last look at the flickering light above the stove, and stepped into the cold morning. Another day, another dollar, if he was lucky. The bell above the diner door gave its usual tired jingle as Nathan pushed it open with his shoulder, the sound barely louder than the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter. The place smelled of stale coffee and burnt grease, the kind of smell that never fully left your clothes no matter how many times you washed them. He clocked in without a word, hanging his coat on the same crooked hook that always threatened to fall off the wall. The diner was half lit, half asleep, just like him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then like they were just as exhausted. A few regulars sat in their usual booths, truckers mostly, their caps pulled low, faces weathered, eyes sunken. They didn't look at him. They never really did. Nathan might as well have been a part of the furniture, just another invisible cog in a tired, humming machine. He tied his apron, grabbed the coffee pot, and started making the rounds. He poured without asking, without speaking, because that's how it worked here. Small talk didn't mean anything before sunrise. It was just hot caffeine and quiet chewing. "Mornin', Nate," came a gravelly voice from a corner booth. Carl. Been driving trucks for 30 years. He didn't smile when he spoke. Didn't need to. "Mornin'," Nathan replied, voice hoarse. He hadn't spoken much since waking up. His words came out flat, like the air had been stolen from his lungs during the walk here. Behind the counter, Marcy, the cook, slammed a pan onto the grill. She looked like she hadn't slept either, mascara smudged, hair tied back in a frizzed bun. "Orders are piling already," she muttered. Nathan nodded and grabbed his notepad. That's when the manager, Todd, emerged from the back office, eyes bloodshot, sleeves rolled. "Hey, Nate," he said too loudly. "Gonna need you to stay late again. Claire called out." Nathan didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just blinked. "Yeah, sure." Todd clapped him on the shoulder like he was doing him a favor. Another shift, another invisible sacrifice. Rent was due in 3 days. Grace's school shoes were worn down to the stitching. Saying no wasn't an option, not anymore. Nathan scribbled down orders with mechanical precision, the ache in his wrist already starting. No one noticed the way he winced. No one ever did. The wind had picked up by the time Nathan pulled up to the curb in front of the school. The heater in the car had given up last winter and never quite came back, so their breath fogged the windows as they sat for a moment longer in the driveway. Grace was bundled in her too small coat, the one with the zipper that stuck halfway up and a faded unicorn patch on the sleeve. She didn't complain. She never did. Nathan glanced back at her through the mirror. She was humming, swinging her legs like it was any other normal day, like her lunch wasn't made of the last slice of bread and a handful of crackers, like the soles of her sneakers weren't flapping slightly with every step. She had that same sparkle in her eyes she always did before school, hopeful, bright, unaware of how close things were to falling apart. "You got your homework?" he asked, voice still rough from the diner air. "Yep," she chirped, holding up her tattered folder. "Pencil case?" "Got it." "Lunch?" She held it up like a prize, silver foil and all. "With the note?" He smiled at that. "Course it's got the note." She beamed, and that alone made the 3 hours of sleep feel like enough. He stepped out and walked her up the path, her hand slipping into his automatically. It was warm, small, and it anchored him to something good, something pure. Other parents passed by in newer cars, holding Starbucks cups and laughing into Bluetooth headsets, but Nathan didn't notice. Not really. He only saw Grace, skipping beside him, her mismatched gloves flapping like wings. At the gate, she stopped and looked up at him. "Are you working both jobs today?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart. But I'll be home in time for bedtime. I promise." She stared at him for a long second, then leaned in and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding tighter than usual. "It's okay, Daddy. I know you're tired, but I think you're a superhero." That was the part that cracked him. Right there on the sidewalk, fighting back the sting in his eyes as his little girl ran toward the school doors, hair bouncing, heart light. He stood there long after she disappeared inside, clutching that feeling like a shield. And then he turned around, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked back toward a world that would never love him as easily as she did. Nathan's boots hit the warehouse floor with a dull thud, the kind of sound that made his knees flinch before his brain could register it. The smell here was different. Dust, oil, metal, and something sharp like dried sweat and despair. He'd barely caught his breath from the diner shift, barely had time to down the burnt coffee Marcy handed him in a styrofoam cup before he clocked out and drove across town. Now he was here, again, just in time to lift boxes that weighed more than his rent check. The foreman didn't say hello. He never did. Just gave a nod and pointed to the new shipment by the back wall. The crates were stacked wrong, leaning like a tired man trying to stand up straight. Nathan adjusted his gloves, the seams frayed from weeks of overuse, and walked toward the pile like a man heading into battle. Every lift pulled at something deep in his back. The dull burn spread across his shoulders like a slow leak, but he pushed through it, jaw clenched, sweat already gathering at his temples despite the cold. Nobody asked how he was. No one cared. The warehouse wasn't built for talking, just moving, just lifting, just shutting up and getting it done. Around him, The others worked in the same silence. A few nodded in his direction when their eyes met. Familiar pain, shared resignation. Most of them looked older than they were. Gravity worked faster in places like this. He was halfway through the second pallet when he felt the familiar tug in his lower spine. Not a snap, not yet. Just a warning. He paused, hand braced against a crate, breathing hard. He didn't have time to be injured. There was no paid leave, no backup plan, no one waiting with an envelope marked emergency. Just Grace. Just him. He straightened up slowly and kept going. Lunch break came, and he sat alone on an overturned bucket behind the loading dock, the sandwich he didn't eat in the morning still in his coat pocket. He unwrapped it and stared at the foil. It wasn't much, but it was the only real thing in his life not made of burden. He took a bite, chewing slowly, eyes locked on the pale gray sky above the alley. Somewhere behind those clouds the sun was still shining. He had to believe that, because sometimes belief was all a man had to keep from breaking. The warehouse lights buzzed overhead like they were mocking him, flickering just enough to feel like a warning. Nathan was halfway through his second backload of the day, sleeves rolled up past his forearms, sweat soaked through his collar. Every part of him ached, from the pads of his feet to the muscles between his shoulders. He didn't check his phone during shifts, couldn't afford to lose even a minute's pay. But when the supervisor barked out a 5-minute water break, he slid it out of his pocket, hoping for nothing and dreading everything. 3 missed calls, all from the same number. He knew it before he even hit redial. "Mr. Carter," the voice on the other end said, calm and detached. "This is a courtesy call from Eastline Utilities. Your current balance remains unpaid despite previous warnings. Unless we receive a minimum payment of $113 by midnight, your service will be disconnected, effective tomorrow morning." He stood still, the world narrowing into static around the words. $113. It might as well have been 1,000. "There must be some mistake," he said, though he knew there wasn't. His voice cracked mid-sentence. "Can you give me until Friday? I get paid then." "I'm sorry, sir. The system is automated. If the payment isn't made by tonight, the order goes through. I wish I could help." That last sentence, "I wish I could help," hit harder than the rest, because it was a lie. She didn't wish anything. She was reading a script, and Nathan was just another account in the red. He ended the call and stared at the screen until it dimmed. The number stared back at him like a scar. He hadn't told Grace. He wouldn't. Not until the lights actually went out. He'd use candles again, make it seem like an adventure, pretend it was fun. That's what dads did, right? Turn darkness into magic? He slipped the phone back in his pocket and went to lift another crate. Later, during his walk to the bus stop, because gas was a luxury now, he checked his account balance. Negative $36. His checking account blinked red like an emergency light no one else could see. He kept walking anyway, past the people in warm cars, past the glowing windows, past the places where electricity was just another invisible comfort no one questioned. And somewhere, buried beneath the weight of it all, he whispered under his breath, like a prayer no one could hear, "Not yet. Please, not yet." The bus groaned to a stop 3 blocks from home, brakes hissing like they were as fed up as the man standing beneath the flickering street lamp. Nathan stepped off with his shoulders rounded, body leaning forward like he had to convince gravity to let him go just a little longer. His fingers were numb, his boots soaked from slush. The sun had long since dipped behind the skyline, leaving the streets glazed with a thin sheen of cold. He cut through the alley behind the gas station to save time, already rehearsing how he'd make dinner out of what was left in the pantry. There were still 2 cans of beans, 1 box of macaroni. And Grace would smile like it was Thanksgiving. She always did. Somehow she made scraps taste like celebration. As he rounded the corner, he saw him. Same man, same spot. Slumped beneath the broken "Open 24 Hours" sign, wrapped in layers of coats that looked like they'd been sewn from old battles. The cardboard sign resting on his knees, read, "Marine vet, hungry, anything helps, God bless." Nathan slowed. He didn't mean to. He just did. The man looked up, blue eyes, cracked lips, maybe 50, maybe older. It was hard to tell in the dark. "Evenin'," the man said, his voice low but respectful. Nathan nodded, hand already reaching for his pocket, even though he knew what was in there. 2 quarters, 1 dime, 1 nickel, 65 cents. He stood there, fingers curled around the change. This was the only money he had. Literally. Not poetic, not exaggerated. There was nothing in the bank, nothing in the wallet. This was it. The man didn't ask for anything. He just offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. "It's all right," he said quietly, seeing the hesitation. "You got your own battles." That was the part that got him. Nathan stepped forward and placed the coins gently in the man's gloved hand. "Maybe just enough for a coffee," he murmured. The vet looked up at him with something deeper than gratitude, something close to recognition. "You sure?" Nathan nodded. "Yeah, I'm sure." He turned and kept walking before the sting behind his eyes took over. The air felt heavier now. He didn't feel heroic. He didn't feel good. He just felt human. And in that moment, even that felt like something he couldn't afford. The apartment was dark when Nathan turned the key and pushed the door open with his shoulder. He'd known it would be. The hallway light was off. The humming from the fridge was gone, and that cold, sharp and unmoving, had crept into the bones of the building, settling in like it belonged there. Grace met him at the door, already wrapped in her blanket like a burrito, flashlight wedged between her hands. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, like they were sneaking into a secret clubhouse. "Hey, baby." He set down his bag gently, letting the silence wrap around him like a reminder. "Lights go out today?" She nodded, her voice still small. "It was okay. I lit candles like we practiced. I made a fort, too." He managed to smile through the pinch in his chest. "A fort, huh? Fancy." She took his hand and pulled him into the living room, where books were stacked like barricades, and the couch cushions formed makeshift walls. 2 stubby candles flickered on the coffee table. The air smelled faintly of wax and cardboard. And somewhere beneath it all, dinner, plain pasta with no sauce, sat waiting in a plastic bowl. "I saved your seat," she said proudly, patting a pillow on the floor. Nathan sat, wincing as he lowered himself down. Grace pulled out her homework folder, all pink stickers and bent corners, and slid over beside him. "I didn't finish yet. I was waiting for you." That broke something in him and fixed something all at once. He leaned over, using his phone light to illuminate her worksheet. "All right, let's do this." As they sounded out words together and worked through math problems by candlelight, her giggles filled the room. She made faces at the shadows on the wall, turned her pencil into a wand, acted like the whole night was a game, and for a moment it was. For a moment it didn't matter that the heat was gone, or that his fingertips were still tingling from the cold. He laughed with her, really laughed. Because when all you have is each other somehow that's enough to light a room. The diner was already buzzing with the low hum of conversation and clattering dishes when Nathan stepped in from the cold. The sky outside was still that pale, early morning gray, and the air carried the kind of chill that slid down your collar and settled in your chest. He rubbed his hands together, already sore, and tied his apron behind his back with muscle memory alone. Table 7 needed refills. Booth 3 wanted their eggs over hard, not over easy, again. The floor was sticky near the register, but there was no time to mop it, not when every second was already borrowed from somewhere else. He moved fast, he always did. One hand steady on the coffee pot, the other scribbling orders on a pad half full of grease smudges. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on, at least most months. And then it happened. He rounded the corner, coffee pot in hand, moving too quickly to notice the new customer sitting alone in the corner booth. The man was dressed like he didn't belong here. Slate gray suit, white shirt crisp enough to cut through fog. A watch that didn't come from any store Nathan had ever walked into. In one clumsy second, The coffee pot clipped the edge of the table and tilted. A splash, hot and sudden, spilled over the rim, splattering across the man's sleeve and onto the pristine tablecloth. Damn it! The man jerked back, startled but not yelling, just sharp. Nathan's heart dropped. "Sir, God, I'm so sorry." He scrambled for napkins, his hands shaking as he blotted at the mess. "It's my fault, completely my fault. Are you burned?" The man looked down, lifting his arm, inspecting the damage. The suit sleeve was damp, stained brown near the cuff. His jaw tightened. Nathan kept apologizing, dabbing at the spill, like he could erase the entire thing if he tried hard enough. "Please, let me comp your breakfast. Or pay for dry cleaning. I wasn't watching." For a long, tight second, the man said nothing. Then he sighed, slow and measured. "It's all right," he said finally. "Accidents happen." Nathan nodded quickly, swallowing the lump in his throat. He didn't know what hurt worse, the embarrassment or the fear that this one mistake might cost him the job he couldn't afford to lose. As he turned to leave, the man looked after him for a beat too long, eyes narrowed. Curious, not angry, like he saw something more than just another tired man in a frayed apron. But Nathan didn't notice. He was already gripping the coffee pot tighter, trying to stop his hands from shaking. Nathan tried not to look in the direction of the man in the gray suit. He kept his eyes down, focused on wiping down the counter, stacking chipped plates, topping off lukewarm coffee. But he could feel it, the weight of a stare that wasn't just passing through, the kind that lingered long enough to mean something. Most customers came and went, heads buried in their phones or papers, blind to the hands serving them. But this one watched. The man hadn't said much after the spill. Just ordered black coffee and eggs, barely touched either. Instead, he observed calmly, like he was waiting for something that hadn't been offered yet. When Nathan came by to refill his mug, the man finally spoke. "How long you been working here?" Nathan blinked. "This place?" He gave a half shrug. "Couple years, off and on." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Do you like it?" He wasn't used to that question. Not from strangers, not in this place. Nathan chuckled under his breath. "Doesn't really matter if I do or don't. It pays." The man tilted his head, his gaze never quite breaking. "You're good at it, efficient. Not many people move like they mean it these days." Nathan wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a trap. "Thanks, I guess." The man sipped his coffee. "You always work doubles?" Nathan stiffened. It wasn't a hostile question. The man's voice was calm, almost warm, but it still felt like being seen without permission. He gave another shrug, more guarded this time. "Bills don't pay themselves." The man's eyes flicked to the scar along Nathan's knuckle, the faded burn mark on his forearm. "You do something else before this?" "Warehouse," Nathan answered, without thinking. "Still do, actually, after this." The man studied him a moment longer. "And after that?" Nathan cracked a tight smile. "Sleep, if I'm lucky." There was a pause, a silence that stretched just long enough to get uncomfortable, before the man set his mug down carefully and said, "Must be hard." Nathan looked up then just for a second. Their eyes met, just long enough for him to realize that this wasn't idle small talk. This man wasn't just killing time. But before he could ask anything, the bell over the door rang. A new table walked in. Nathan pulled away with a practiced nod and disappeared behind the counter. He didn't see the way the man watched him go or how long he stared after him, thoughtful, interested, and just a little surprised. The next time Nathan came around to check on his table, the man in the gray suit was still sitting there, fingers laced around his coffee mug, untouched eggs pushed to the side. The diner buzzed around them, silverware clinking, bacon hissing on the grill. But the man seemed completely still, like he had all the time in the world. His eyes tracked Nathan's every move, from the way he wiped down counters to the easy way he greeted the elderly woman in booth 2 like she was an old friend. There was something about him, Nathan, that is, that didn't match the rest of the place. When Nathan approached again with the coffee pot, the man set down his mug but didn't lift it. Instead, he asked, "You always smile like that?" Nathan blinked. "Like what?" The man gave a slight gesture. "Like everything's fine, even when it's clearly not." Nathan exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the handle of the pot. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured the refill with practiced ease, even though the coffee was running low and he knew the burner would start burning what little was left in 5 minutes. "Comes with the job," Nathan said finally. "No one wants to be served breakfast by someone who looks like they're falling apart." The man leaned back, arms crossing loosely. "And are you?" Nathan didn't look at him. He wiped an imaginary smudge off the table. "What, falling apart? Not today." There was a flicker in the man's expression, half amusement, half something else, respect maybe, or curiosity. Nathan finally looked up, offering a lopsided grin. "Besides, though," he said, "you keep frowning at your eggs like they stole your wallet. One of us has to balance it out." The man let out a quiet laugh, the kind people make when they're caught off guard. "I just think it's rare," he said, "to see someone carrying so much and still finding a reason to be decent." Nathan glanced at him, really looked this time. For a moment, the pretense faded. No waiter, no customer. Just two men sitting in a place too tired to care who they were. "I smile," Nathan said, voice quieter now, "because I've got a little girl who thinks I hung the moon, and if I stop smiling, she might start wondering if it's true." The man didn't say anything to that, just nodded slowly, like he understood more than he let on. And for the first time that morning, his eyes softened, like maybe he wasn't just there for breakfast after all. The rush hit just after 7. A busload of construction workers pulled in like clockwork, boots heavy with mud, voices loud with the kind of tired that never quite leaves a man's bones. Nathan moved between tables like a ghost with a coffee pot, refilling, scribbling, dodging elbows, nodding at bad jokes he didn't have the energy to laugh at. When he turned back toward the corner booth, the one with the man in the gray suit, it was empty. No sound, no goodbye. Just the faint warmth of a body that had been sitting there not long before. Nathan blinked, half expecting the man to have gone to the restroom or maybe stepped outside to take a call. But then his eyes caught it, something out of place against the dull laminate of the counter. A single business card, crisp, white, left just beside the coffee mug, perfectly angled, like it had been placed there deliberately. He picked it up slowly, cautiously, as if it might disintegrate at his touch. The card was heavy, expensive, the kind of paper you didn't find at corner stores. Embossed across the center, in dark blue print, was a name, Julian Royce. Beneath it, smaller text, Managing Partner, Royce & Wolf Holdings, a phone number, an email, and nothing else. No slogan, no "We care about your future," just a name, clean and sharp like a blade. Nathan turned the card over in his hand, blank on the back. He looked around, scanning the parking lot through the window. No sleek sedan, no sign of him, just rainwater puddles and the muffled rumble of early traffic. Gone. Was it an accident? A forgotten detail in the rush of leaving? Or was it deliberate, left behind like a breadcrumb on a path Nathan didn't know he was walking? Marcy passed behind him with a tray full of plates. "You all right?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Nathan slipped the card into his apron pocket. "Yeah, just weird morning." He went back to work like nothing had changed, but every few minutes his hand brushed against the outline of the card in his pocket. Heavy, present, waiting. And for the rest of the shift, even with the noise and motion and orders flying, Nathan couldn't stop wondering if he'd just been handed a mistake or a door. The card had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 2 days, untouched, just lying there, clean, quiet, and out of place. It didn't belong among the unpaid bills and crayon drawings. It didn't belong in Nathan's world, period. He'd picked it up a dozen times, turning it over between his fingers, thumb pressing the embossed name like he could rub it away. Each time he told himself the same thing. It's probably nothing. Grace sat at the table, feet swinging beneath her chair as she colored in a picture of a lion, the mane bright pink. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, but her eyes, as always, were sharp. She caught him staring at the card again and set her crayon down. "Why don't you just call it?" she asked. Nathan blinked. "Call what?" she pointed. "The fancy card." He gave a short laugh and shook his head. "It's not that simple, kiddo." Grace tilted her head. "Why not? You said he was nice." "Yeah, well, people like that don't usually leave cards unless they want something, and they definitely don't want anything from someone like me." She didn't respond right away, just kept coloring. Then, in a quiet voice that stopped him cold, she said, "But maybe he saw something you don't." Nathan looked at her, really looked. Her face was all innocence and truth. She wasn't trying to be wise, she was just being honest. He picked up the card again, stared at it. He thought about the power being shut off again next week, the holes in Grace's sneakers, the cough he couldn't afford to get checked out. He thought about how tired he was, bone-tired, and how the smile he wore every day for her was starting to crack at the edges. He stepped toward the trash can, held the card over the lid, then paused. Grace looked up, expectant. He lowered his arm, sighed, walked to the kitchen phone, and dialed the number slowly, like each digit was a step further into something he couldn't undo. It rang once, then twice. And just before the third ring, a voice answered. "This is Julian Royce." Calm, sharp, like the suit he wore. Nathan swallowed hard. Hey, you left your card at the diner." A pause, then, "I was hoping you'd call." The building towered above everything else on the block, a polished glass monolith reflecting a sky Nathan couldn't remember having time to look at lately. It was the kind of place people in his neighborhood pointed at from the bus and said, "Someone important works there." And now somehow, he was standing in front of it, shoulders hunched in a jacket 2 winters too old, boots still caked with the dried mud of a life that didn't know polish or shine. The revolving door whooshed open, and he stepped inside. The lobby was silent marble and soft echoes, the kind of quiet that made every footstep sound like it didn't belong. People moved with purpose here, tailored suits, glossy heels, phone calls that didn't sound like arguments with utility companies. No one looked at him, but somehow he felt like every eye in the place was on him, judging, wondering who let the mechanic in. A young woman behind the front desk barely looked up. "Name?" "Nathan Carter. I have a meeting with Mr. Royce." She clicked a few keys, then motioned to the elevator, 27th floor. He nodded, tried to smile, but it didn't quite land. The elevator doors opened with a mechanical sigh, and he stepped inside alone. The interior was all mirrors and brushed steel, the lights so bright they felt sterile. He caught his reflection and looked away. He didn't like the man staring back, tired, unshaven, wearing the only button-up shirt he owned that didn't have grease on it. His sleeves were too short, his hands looked wrong here. Everything about him did. As the numbers climbed, 8, 15, 21, his chest tightened. He could feel the weight of every floor like bricks stacked on his back. He didn't know what he was walking into. A job offer? A test? A joke? He almost hit the emergency stop, almost turned around. But then the elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open to reveal a hallway of frosted glass and golden light. He took a breath, straightened his collar like it might matter, and stepped out, knowing full well that whatever came next, he wasn't ready for it. But he'd come anyway. Julian Royce stood by the window, one hand tucked casually in his pocket, the other holding a small espresso cup he hadn't touched. The skyline stretched behind him, a sea of steel and ambition, glowing faintly beneath the morning haze. He didn't turn when Nathan stepped in, just said without looking, "You made it." Nathan hovered by the door, heart hammering. "Yeah," he managed. "Wasn't sure I should." Now Julian turned, studying him, not with pity, not with arrogance, but with the kind of scrutiny that made Nathan feel like his whole life had been laid out on the table and weighed. "I'm glad you did," Julian said, gesturing to a sleek chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Nathan hesitated. The chair looked like it cost more than his monthly rent. He sat anyway, hands folded tightly in his lap, trying not to wring them. He didn't belong here, and every second reminded him. Julian sat across from him, leaned back, and set the cup down. "You work 2 jobs, 6, sometimes 7, days a week. 1 at a diner, 1 at a warehouse. You take care of your daughter alone. You've never missed a shift. And you still manage to smile like the world isn't breaking your back." Nathan swallowed hard. "You been looking into me?" Julian nodded once. "Yes, I have." A pause. Nathan shifted in his seat. "Why?" Julian steepled his fingers, his voice steady. "Because you're exactly the kind of person I want in my corner." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across to Nathan. "Operations assistant. Here. In this building, Monday through Friday, 45 grand starting salary. Health benefits, paid time off, no graveyard shifts, no backbreaking labor." Nathan stared at the folder like it might bite him. I don't have a degree," he said. "No office experience. I've never used half the machines in places like this." Julian shrugged. "I don't need a resume. I need a man who works like you do, learns like you do, and gives a damn about what he's doing." Nathan looked down, the weight of it hitting him harder than he expected. He'd come in expecting a prank, a misunderstanding, maybe even a con. But this was something he didn't know how to process. A real job, a real future, one where he could be home in time to help Grace with her homework, not by candlelight. He didn't answer right away. Julian didn't push. He just said, "Take your time, but know this. This offer isn't charity, it's recognition of something most people never notice." Nathan looked up, eyes wide with something between fear and the first flicker of hope he'd let himself feel in a long, long time. The folder sat on the kitchen table like it didn't belong there. Too clean, too white, too full of promise. Nathan stared at it in silence, elbows resting on the table, hands steepled in front of his face. The house was quiet except for the faint rattle of the wind against the window pane and the occasional drip from the kitchen faucet that he still hadn't found time to fix. He'd brought the offer home hours ago, but hadn't opened it again. Couldn't. The numbers were still in his head anyway. Salary, benefits, hours. All of it spelled out a way out, a future, a break from the grind that had left his spine aching and his hands too swollen some nights to even hold a fork. But it didn't sit right. It felt like cheating, like accepting it meant admitting he couldn't do it on his own. Like saying yes meant everything he'd fought through, the diner shifts, the warehouse bruises, the nights sleeping in his car when Grace was still a baby, hadn't made him strong enough. His pride had carried him through years of empty wallets and silent pain. What was he without it? "Daddy?" Grace's voice broke the silence. She padded into the kitchen in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" he asked, forcing a smile. She ignored that. Her eyes went straight to the folder. "Is that the new job?" He nodded, unsure of what else to say. "Are you going to take it?" He hesitated. "I don't know." Grace walked up to him and leaned against his arm. "Why not?" He stared at the wall, jaw tight. "Because I don't want someone else to think I couldn't do it myself." She looked up at him, small and serious. "You mean like you're not strong enough?" Nathan exhaled, the words hitting closer than he expected. "Yeah, something like that." Grace leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "You don't have to be tired to be strong." He didn't say anything, just sat there, jaw clenched, throat tight. And in that quiet, with his daughter pressed against him and her words echoing in his chest, the weight of all he'd been carrying began to shift. Not gone. Not yet. But maybe it didn't all have to rest on his shoulders anymore. Nathan stood in the lobby of Royce and Wolf Holdings, fingers twitching inside his jacket pockets, heart pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. The polished marble floor reflected every movement. His boots, recently scrubbed, still felt like they didn't belong here. Around him, professionals in sleek clothes and confident strides passed without sparing him more than a glance, moving like they'd been born into boardrooms. He wasn't sure what to do with his hands, or his shoulders, or his breath. A receptionist with perfect posture and a voice smooth as glass greeted him and pointed him to the elevator. 27th floor again. Same hallway, guy, same glow. But everything felt different now. This time he wasn't a visitor. He was here to work. When the doors opened, a young man in a tailored blazer, Ben, he thought his name was, met him with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Nathan. We've got your badge ready, and your desk's just down this way." Nathan followed him past rows of glass-walled offices and open-plan workstations with expensive monitors and fancy keyboards. There was no oil, no clanging metal, no smell of fryer grease or stale coffee, just filtered air and quiet efficiency. His desk was tucked into a small corner, clean and uncluttered, a brand-new laptop blinking patiently for him to log in. A nameplate sat on the edge. Nathan Carter, operations assistant. Seeing it printed like that felt like fiction. He set his bag down slowly, unsure what came next. The keyboard felt foreign beneath his fingers. His login didn't work on the first try, or the second. He had to ask for help twice. When someone mentioned Slack, he thought they were talking about pants. Everyone else moved with fluency, clicking through tasks like it was second nature. He scribbled notes as fast as he could during orientation, his penmanship cramped and rushed. There were acronyms he didn't understand, jargon that made his head spin. He nodded along anyway, faking confidence, heart thudding, like he was about to be caught pretending to be someone he wasn't. But every time doubt crept in, he thought of Grace's face when he kissed her goodbye that morning. "You're gonna do great, Daddy." And maybe that was enough, for now to keep trying. To sit a little straighter, to press the keys again, to stay in the room, even when everything inside him whispered he didn't belong. The tie was too tight. No matter how many times Nathan adjusted it, it felt like a noose. He'd watched 3 YouTube videos on how to tie the thing the night before, and he still wasn't sure he got it right. It sat crooked on his chest, like it knew it didn't belong there. The suit jacket was borrowed. A neighbor from down the hall had offered it when he heard Nathan landed a real job. Said it would make a better first impression than the thrift store blazer he'd worn to the interview. It fit, mostly, but only if he didn't breathe too deep or move too fast. Everywhere he went in the office, Nathan felt like he was walking around with a blinking sign over his head that read, "Doesn't belong." He could feel it in the way people paused mid-conversation when he approached, the polite but distant smiles, the glances at his worn boots the first morning before he realized everyone else wore polished leather. He didn't speak the language, not really. They talked in abbreviations, in project goals and fiscal quarters. He wrote things down in a little notebook because he didn't trust himself to remember them. And sometimes when someone said something he didn't understand, he just nodded and hoped it wouldn't come back to haunt him. The break room was the worst. Every small talk circle seemed closed before he could step near it. He poured his coffee in silence, watching people laugh at jokes he didn't get, passing around inside references he didn't share. When he caught his reflection in the microwave door, tie askew, jacket sleeves too short, eyes ringed with the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix, he barely recognized himself. All he could think about was the warehouse, the diner, places where he knew the rhythm, knew the expectations. This world was too polished, too clean, too delicate. And he felt like a man trying to tiptoe through it with mud still on his soles. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and returned to his desk without a word, praying no one noticed how out of place he was. And even more than that, praying he could survive long enough to start believing he belonged. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Grace had gone to bed hours ago, her soft breathing drifting from the next room like a metronome of peace he didn't feel. Nathan sat alone at the kitchen table, still wearing the suit that didn't fit, the collar unbuttoned, the tie draped around his shoulders like a burden. The overhead light buzzed faintly. He hadn't even turned the TV on. The silence felt earned, heavy, like something waiting to be broken. He stared at the folder Julian had given him on day one. Company policies, welcome letter, benefit breakdowns. All those pages, all those promises. And still, a pit in his stomach that hadn't left since he first stepped into that gleaming building. He'd smiled all day, forced small talk, nodded like he understood, laughed when the others laughed, even when he didn't get the joke. Every word he spoke felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of doubt. He didn't know if he could do this, didn't know if he had what it took. The confidence, the knowledge, the polish. He was used to lifting heavy things, solving problems with his hands, showing up early and staying late just to prove he could outwork the clock. But in this world, this new world, none of that mattered. People here solved problems with spreadsheets and buzzwords. They quoted numbers like gospel. No one cared how many years he'd worked doubles, how many meals he'd skipped to make sure Grace ate first. All they saw was a quiet man in a cheap jacket pretending he wasn't drowning. He rubbed his eyes, elbows on the table, hands dragging down his face. Part of him wanted to quit, not out of pride, but fear. Fear of screwing it up, of losing this shot, of proving every whisper in his head right. He glanced toward Grace's room. The door was cracked just enough to see her nightlight glowing, soft and steady. She'd told him that morning, "You looked like a superhero in your suit." He'd laughed. But now, sitting in the dark, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a fraud. But still, he hadn't walked away. Not yet. Nathan sat at his desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, the glow of the screen casting shadows across his face. The numbers stared back at him, jumbled and soulless, just rows in a logistics program that someone else had built. To most people in the room, it was just another report, another digital checklist to click through before lunch. But to Nathan, it looked wrong. The numbers didn't add up. The data on the shipments from the regional warehouse didn't match the inventory logs. Pallets were showing up late or short, sometimes both. Everyone in the operations team chalked it up to vendor delays or minor system bugs. A few shrug-offs. It'll sort itself out, but Nathan knew better. You didn't work in a warehouse for 5 years and not learn how to spot the difference between a computer glitch and someone loading a truck wrong. He leaned closer, pulling up the route logs, delivery schedules, load weights. He scribbled notes with a pencil, real paper, not digital, and circled a pattern no one else had caught. Same driver, same day of the week, same discrepancy in weight. He remembered that trick. You stack a few pallets wrong or fudge the inventory sheet, and suddenly what looks like a minor supply chain hiccup is really thousands in lost goods. Nathan didn't hesitate. He printed everything out, made copies, and marched down the hall to the glass office where the mid-level manager sat. Her name was Melissa, sharp-eyed, always moving fast. He knocked, heart-pounding, and held up the file. "Got a minute?" She barely looked up. "Can it wait?" "I don't think it should." She sighed, but waved him in. He laid the printouts on her desk and walked her through it. Simple, direct, like showing someone how to change a tire. By the time he was done, she was no longer half listening. She was leaning forward, silent, rereading his notes. When she finally looked up, her eyes had changed. "How'd you even catch this?" He shrugged. "Same way you hear when an engine's running rough. Doesn't sound right." She didn't smile, but something shifted in her expression. Recognition, respect. For the first time since stepping into this world, Nathan felt like he wasn't just wearing the suit. He was filling it. The next morning, Nathan walked into the office with the same old jacket and the same too-tight collar, but something felt different. The air had shifted, just slightly. It started with a nod from Melissa near the elevators, barely more than a glance, but it held something that hadn't been there before. Acknowledgement. Then, at his desk, one of the analysts, Ryan, always buried in dual monitors and data streams, leaned over the partition and said, "Hey, you the one who flagged that inventory issue?" Nathan looked up, a little cautious. "Yeah. Why?" Ryan smirked, tapping his keyboard. "You saved us from signing off on a bad shipment this morning. That catch was solid." He didn't know what to say to that. He just nodded, muttered a quiet thanks, and turned back to his screen. But his hands didn't shake this time. Later, in the break room, someone handed him a fresh cup of coffee before he had to pour it himself. Small things, quiet gestures. But in this world, they meant something. He caught whispers in the hall. People who hadn't even learned his name before were talking about the guy from Ops who flagged the load pattern thing. He wasn't just the new guy anymore. He wasn't Julian's charity case like he'd feared. He was someone who saw what they didn't. When Julian passed him in the corridor that afternoon, he slowed just enough to speak. "Good work, Nathan." That was it. No ceremony, no handshakes, just 4 words. But they carried weight, real weight. Nathan returned to his desk, sat a little straighter. The numbers on the screen didn't look so foreign now. He understood more than he realized. He was learning, fast. And the others, people who had degrees, resumes, suits tailored to fit, were starting to see what Grace had always known. He wasn't just a guy trying to make it. He was a man built for the climb, and this time the suit didn't feel like armor. It felt like his. It was late when Nathan heard the knock on the glass wall of his cubicle. Most of the office had emptied hours ago, the floor lit only by the glow of monitor screens and the occasional exit sign. He looked up to see Julian standing there, not in his usual suit, but a dark sweater and slacks, more casual than Nathan had ever seen him. "You got a minute?" Julian asked. Nathan nodded, surprised. "Sure." Julian gestured toward the private conference room at the end of the hall. "Walk with me." Nathan followed, nerves creeping up. He couldn't tell if this was about work or something else. The last time he'd been in that room, it was to sign his onboarding papers. Now the table was empty, the lights low. Julian sat at the far end and motioned for him to join. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the city through the tall glass windows filling the space between them. Then Julian leaned back, his eyes distant. "I used to mop floors," he said suddenly, like he was picking up in the middle of a story only he knew. Nathan blinked. "Sorry?" Julian glanced at him and smiled faintly. "When I was 16, night shift at a hardware store. My dad had walked out. My mom worked 2 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on, so I lied about my age and picked up what I could. Stock rooms, janitor work, whatever they'd give me." Nathan didn't speak. He just listened. "I remember thinking that people in suits must have been born that way, that I'd never belong in the kind of places where coffee was free and someone else cleaned up after you." Julian looked down at the dark wood table. "But then I met someone who saw past where I came from, who gave me a shot. Not out of pity, but because he saw how hard I worked." He paused, letting the words hang in the room. "That's why I hired you," he said. "Because I saw it in you, the hunger, the grit, the kind of work ethic you can't teach." Nathan swallowed hard. His throat was tight, chest full of words he couldn't form. Julian leaned forward. "Don't ever think you don't belong here, Nathan. You remind me of where I came from and where I'm still going." Nathan nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. The city lights blinked outside like distant stars, and for the first time he didn't feel small sitting at that table. He felt seen. Nathan was halfway through sorting logistics reports when Julian appeared at his desk again. No warning, no formality, just a quiet knock on the cubicle frame. Nathan looked up, eyebrows raised, fingers still hovering over his keyboard. "You free for a minute?" Julian asked. Nathan nodded, saving his work and rising from his seat. "Of course." Julian didn't lead him to the conference room this time. Instead, he walked him into his office, spacious, sleek, lined with books Nathan couldn't pronounce, and art that looked like it belonged in a museum. But it wasn't the setting that made Nathan nervous. It was the look in Julian's eyes, serious, steady, like he was carrying something heavy. "Close the door," Julian said softly. Nathan did. Julian moved behind his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a slim folder. Nothing like the onboarding packet from months ago. This one was smaller, thinner, but somehow heavier, like whatever it contained was meant to shift the ground beneath someone's feet. Julian didn't speak right away. He simply handed the folder across the desk and waited. Nathan opened it, read the first page, then blinked, read it again. His mouth went dry. "What is this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Equity," Julian said. 5%. Nathan stared at him. 5% of what? Julian leaned forward, folding his hands. "Of the logistics arm, the one you helped restructure. Your catch saved us tens of thousands this quarter. You didn't just do your job, you changed how we operate. That kind of insight deserves more than a pat on the back." Nathan shook his head slowly. I'm not an investor. I didn't go to school for this. I'm just—" "You're not just anything," Julian cut in gently. "You're someone who sees what others miss. Someone who works like he's got something to prove. I don't want you clocking in and out like a cog in a machine. I want you to have a stake in what you're building." Nathan looked down at the papers again. His hands. The apartment felt warmer that night, not because the heat was on, it wasn't, not yet, but because Nathan walked through the door carrying something he hadn't brought home in years. Lightness. His coat was dusted with late winter slush, his fingers stiff from the wind, but his eyes, they were different. Grace noticed it right away. She was on the floor with her crayons, the TV playing some cartoon in the background, but the second he walked in, she looked up and smiled like she was seeing him again for the first time. "Hey, Daddy," she chirped, scrambling to her feet. He caught her mid-run, lifting her with a grunt and a laugh as she wrapped her arms around his neck. She smelled like crayons and peanut butter and home. "You're in a good mood," she said, pulling back to inspect his face like a detective. Nathan chuckled, setting her down gently. "I guess I am. Did something good happen at work?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, something really good?" She tilted her head, eyes narrowing like she could sense the shift, but didn't know where to put it yet. "You look different, like you're not tired." He didn't know what to say to that, so he kissed her forehead and hung up his coat. He sat down at the table, pulled off his boots, and just breathed. For once, there was no mental checklist, no quiet panic crawling in the back of his brain. The folder was still in his bag, the one with his name next to words like owner, like partner. Grace climbed into the chair across from him, legs swinging, hands folded under her chin. "So," she said slowly, "if things are better now—" He looked up. She leaned in, hopeful. "Can we get a dog?" He blinked. "A dog?" He laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through, not because it was funny, but because it hit him so hard he didn't see it coming. Not a toy, not a trip, not anything big or loud or expensive. Just a dog, something soft, something to love. Grace smiled, wide and waiting. Nathan wiped his eyes before the tears had a chance to fall. "Maybe," he whispered. "Yeah, maybe we can." She clapped, giggling, already talking about names. And in that moment, all the long nights, the aching feet, the swallowed pride, it all made sense. Because sometimes the measure of success wasn't money in the bank. It was hearing your daughter ask for joy, and realizing for the first time you could actually say yes. The diner looked smaller than he remembered. Same chipped counter, same worn stools, the smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease thick in the air. It was early, just past 6, and the regulars were already parked in their usual booths, nursing mugs like they were sacred. Nathan stood by the door for a moment, unnoticed, soaking it in. This place had once been everything, his first shift of the day, his second home, his last nerve. Marcy was behind the counter flipping pancakes with her usual scowl, hair tied back in the same frizzed bun. She hadn't seen him yet. He didn't step forward, just watched. Then he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope. Inside 3 crisp $100 bills. No note. No name. Just enough to fix the broken heat, maybe replace the grease-stained uniforms. He tucked it beneath the napkin dispenser on the far counter when no one was looking, turned, and slipped back out before anyone could ask what he was doing there. Next stop, the warehouse. The air there still smelled like metal and sweat, thick with dust that never really settled. A forklift beeped in the distance. Men shouted over the whine of machines. It hadn't changed. Time didn't move in places like this. It just passed. Nathan walked along the perimeter fence, watching through the chain links. He saw Tony, the foreman, barking at a new guy who looked exactly like he had once looked. Tired, unsure, trying too hard. Nathan reached into his other coat pocket. Another envelope, smaller this time. Just 2 bills, folded clean. He slid it under the fence where the break room door was left cracked open, where they kept the coffee can for emergencies. Beer money, gas money, groceries, whatever the day demanded. He stood there for a second, staring at the place that had once broken his body day after day. Not with anger, not with regret. Just thanks. Because it had made him, molded him, tested him. But it didn't own him anymore. Nathan turned and walked away, the cold wind biting at his face. But he didn't pull his collar up. For the first time, it didn't feel like something he had to brace against. It felt like closure, like pride, rewritten. The rain was coming down steady, a cold spring drizzle that clung to everything, soaking through coats and pride alike. Nathan stood under the awning of a grocery store, one hand gripping a paper bag full of dinner, the other tucked into his pocket, where the warmth barely reached. Grace had wanted to make spaghetti tonight, real spaghetti, with meat and sauce from a jar that didn't have the clearance sticker on it. He could finally say yes to those small things. He was about to head to the car when he saw her. A young woman, early 20s maybe, standing at the edge of the parking lot near the cart return. Hair plastered to her face, jacket too thin for the weather. One hand gripped a stroller, the other holding her phone to her ear as her voice cracked through tears. "I know, but I just need a little gas. Please, just enough to get home." Nathan stopped, not out of pity, not out of judgment, just instinct. She hung up, eyes red, the silence around her heavier than the rain. He didn't approach right away. He'd been her once, in 100 different ways. The voice on the other end that said no, the empty gas tank, the baby that still needed feeding even when the world didn't care. After a minute, he walked over slowly, careful not to startle her. "Excuse me," he said gently. "You all right?" She wiped at her eyes. "Yeah, just a long day." Nathan nodded, pulling out his wallet. "I've had a few of those myself." He handed her a folded bill, not a fortune, but enough. Enough for gas, maybe diapers, maybe a hot coffee if she let herself have it. She looked down at the money, stunned. "I can't—" "You're not taking anything," he said softly. "You're just passing it forward. Someday you'll help someone else." She nodded, biting her lip to keep it from trembling. "Thank you." He smiled and turned away before she could say anything more. Back in his car, engine humming beneath the rain, Nathan glanced at the rearview mirror and saw her wiping her cheeks, hope blooming in the fog of the glass. He didn't need to be rich to give what he was given. He just needed to remember what it felt like, to be seen. The classroom smelled like dry erase markers and juice boxes, the kind of scent Nathan hadn't been around in years, but remembered instantly. Tiny chairs, colorful posters, with words like "Dream Big" and "You Can Do It" lined the walls. He stood at the front of the room, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. Grace sat near the front, her eyes locked on him like he was a rock star. That alone made his heart squeeze. It was career day. He'd almost said no. The invitation from her teacher had sat on the counter for 2 weeks. There were other parents coming, doctors, lawyers, business owners. What did he have to talk about? That he used to wash dishes before the sun came up? That there were nights he'd fed Grace the last of the milk and gone to bed hungry? But Grace had asked him so proud, "Will you come, Daddy? I told them you help run a company now." So he came. He cleared his throat, voice unsure at first. "Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Carter. I work in logistics and operations for a company in the city." A few kids looked bored already, others just curious. "I wasn't always in an office," he continued. "I used to work at a diner, then at a warehouse. I've swept floors, stocked shelves, cleaned bathrooms. I worked 2 jobs most of my life. Not because I liked it, but because I had to." One boy in the back raised his hand. "Did you get rich?" The class laughed. Nathan smiled. "Not exactly, but I get to pick my daughter up from school now. I get to eat dinner with her, and I don't wake up wondering if we can keep the lights on." He let that hang there, looking around at the sea of small faces. "What I want you to know is, success doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it looks like showing up every day even when no one's clapping. Sometimes it looks like saying yes to something you're scared of." He met Grace's eyes. She beamed, pride practically spilling from her. "And sometimes," he said softly, "success looks like your kid thinking you're a hero, even when you feel like you're still figuring it out." There was a silence after that. Not awkward, just full. Then a few hands shot up, eager, curious. And in that moment Nathan realized this wasn't just a talk, it was a seed. And he was planting something he wished someone had once planted in him. The restaurant was quiet. Tucked away on a side street where the lights were warm and the music was soft. The kind of place Nathan had never stepped foot in before. It wasn't flashy, no white tablecloths or overpriced menus, but it had the kind of intimacy that made conversations linger. A place built for moments that mattered. Julian sat across from him, a glass of wine untouched beside his plate, sleeves rolled up, no tie tonight. He looked tired, but in the way a man does when he finally lets himself slow down. Nathan still felt out of place, even in the nicer clothes Grace had helped him pick out, but Julian didn't treat him like a guest or an employee, just a man at a table, an equal. The waitress came and went, dropping off their meals without fuss. Steak for Julian, roasted chicken for Nathan. He hadn't eaten like this in years, maybe ever. But they didn't talk about work, not once. Julian took a sip of water, leaned back and said, "So, Grace still asking for a dog?" Nathan laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Every day. She's got names picked out. I told her we'd wait until spring, but between you and me, I'm already researching dog food brands." Julian smiled, genuine and relaxed. "She's lucky, you know." Nathan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Why's that?" "Because she gets to see what strength looks like without needing to explain it." Julian met his eyes, calm and steady. "You didn't just take a job, Nathan. You walked into a different life and made it your own. That's rare." Nathan looked down for a moment, the weight of those words sinking deep. "I didn't think I could do it," he admitted. "I still don't, some days." Julian nodded slowly. "You did, and you are." There was no ceremony, no speeches. Just 2 men eating quietly, a shared silence that felt full instead of awkward. Every now and then, Nathan would glance at Julian, still waiting for the catch, for some fine print he'd missed. But it never came. Just mutual respect, a meal shared, and an understanding between 2 men who knew exactly how far the other had come. Nathan finished his plate, sat back, and for the first time in a long time, let himself enjoy the moment without apology. The porch light glowed soft and steady against the deepening blue of the evening sky. It wasn't a bright light, nothing fancy, just a bulb in a weathered fixture screwed into siding that had seen better years. But it stayed on now, always. No more flickering, no more outages, no more apologies whispered in the dark about broken things that couldn't be fixed. Nathan leaned quietly against the doorframe. arms crossed, sipping lukewarm tea as the last traces of daylight faded into the hush of night. Grace sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket with her book open in her lap, legs crisscrossed beneath her. She read aloud in a soft, steady voice, lips moving to each word like it was part of a story she already knew by heart. He didn't interrupt, just watched. She'd insisted on coming outside to read, said the porch was the best place to think. He hadn't argued. These days, he rarely did with her. She was growing into someone sharp and kind, someone who carried more light than most adults he knew. The porch light illuminated her face, casting a soft glow on the freckles dusted across her nose. That light used to be a symbol of frustration, another thing he couldn't control. Back when bills were paid late and fuses popped, and sometimes the only light they had came from candles or flashlights with batteries that barely held on. Now it meant something else. Stability, peace, a life rebuilt one careful, exhausting step at a time. He still wore the same hands, calloused, worn, familiar, but everything else had shifted. Not because he stopped struggling, but because he'd learned how to fight for something bigger than survival. He looked at Grace, turning the page with gentle fingers, mouthing the words before saying them aloud. She glanced up and caught him staring, her smile blooming instantly. "You okay, Daddy?" she asked. He nodded, voice caught in his throat. "Yeah," he said. "I'm really okay." And as he stood there, watching the little girl who had once been his reason to endure become the light he now lived by, he realized something. The struggle hadn't broken him. It had built something stronger. And that porch light? It wasn't just about keeping the dark away, it was proof they'd made it.